welcome to Vision Denial and Clearing Vision in MSI. We are at day 5 of groups, and yet I am still not impressed by how Mad Lions are playing today. Well, let's just jump into the day then. So we're going to be looking in at every game of the day, just as usual. There are no tiebreakers. And I gotta say, this was, despite how exciting some of the games were, this was fairly underwhelming. We're going to start with our first friends here, our feline grudge match. And by grudge match, I mean the match that tells me that Mad Lions are not gonna do so hot against Dam 1 and RNG. So we got Mad Lions versus Fast Pay Wildcats was the first game of the day, and Wildcats had me almost convinced also that they had improved. Almost. See me, Wildcats? Giving you a bone here. You did okay. Nothing super interesting about the draft itself. Both sides had fairly standard go at it. Engage options, disengage options, the rest. What I think was really surprising for me though is that Mad had not very little approach to vision or any kind of setup that would have been remotely useful for them in a lot of these. Their neutral objective setup was incredibly inconsistent, and this really mostly allowed the Wildcats to absorb any particular pressure that was put onto them, and it allowed them to actually keep up and gain leads over time. And honestly, this game is fairly solid out of Wildcats, all things considered, from their performance in the last 3 days beforehand that they had played, because we'll never see it again for one. But they recognized poor map movement out of the Lions, out of Mad Lions, and had understood how to nullify their win condition during this entire game. And I don't think necessarily they did anything to play towards their own win condition the entire time, but I have to give credit where credit is due, that they were still playing a better game than the Lions were. And this only gives me some pause for concern, because this is, to me, I think, one of the worst teams at the tournament right now. We won't, currently, at least this is my thought process, is that this is one of the worst teams that is played in the entire tournament, regardless of the results itself. But the actual quality of play, the actual approach to it, just because a team can punish a better team at any given moment, recognizes that at least they are playing at a high professional level, not that they are a very good high professional level team. Right, they're playing at the bare minimum that is required to be able to be at the tournament. And Wildcats did above and beyond in this one game today. And it's really unfortunate, because I was kind of looking forward to how they were going to approach this tournament from the playoffs they had. I had kind of some concerns regarding whether or not their side of the playoff bracket was harder than the other side. And that to me meant that they were going to show up in a way that was a lot better than what the total region was giving me. And unfortunately, I think that's either the read for me is wrong, or in the same case for the Unicorns, they just didn't show up in the way that people were expecting them to, and they didn't put in the work necessary for it. Not that they didn't put any work, but like they didn't put the necessary amount of work for it, because this was not a great performance. And because of this team, the way that this team was performing, and the way that they still managed to punish, and were had a fairly efficient close and Baron. Tells me that like Mad Lions needs to reevaluate just how they're, I don't know, how they're like, how they want to go forward in the tournament when it comes to facing off against teams that are much better than them. Yeah, those are like the thing that comes up to me at least. But like that was just after the first game of the day that I watched, and that's not a good sign going forward when I'm looking at the other games. And I'm hoping at least that the both of these teams facing the other two remaining teams from this would solidify my thoughts on this process, or solidify my thoughts on like how I view both of these teams, because I've had very sour taste from it. Mad Lions, at least, you know, they're competing in a way that is consistent with the region they're from, but not in any way of like the degree that I was expecting. And just the Wildcats just disappointing in general. Uh, After that game, after the Wildcats won, good job, you won a game. Uh, they move up to 1-3, and Lions have to wait another game to solidify their continuation in the tournament and go 3-1. Next, let's just put all of you back to your little spots. This is so much fun. We got ourselves our Talons, our Saint-Germain Talons, against Pain Gaming. And my goodness, am I ever so happy about the sudden and continuous improvement from both of these teams. Pain Gaming, especially in the early game. This was a team whose early game I was not hot on. They consistently were a late game team that required and relied on their team fighting in the late game, and I'm happy that they realized that they were not the team fighting team of the tournament, or at least not even of their group, and have pivoted themselves to play early game. Really good. They set themselves up for tracking jungle early. Granted, Paris Saint-Germain did the same thing. This is a weird pivot from them in terms of like having to readjust to the bot laner that they have to pick up, readjusting to Doggo. But I can appreciate that they've become more and more consistent as every game that they've played, and this is a very good sign for me. There's still some hiccups here and there. They're like the coordination is not as solid, it seems. Their tempo lead was pretty solid throughout this entire game, though, and had pretty great vision. And they were winning across the board on almost all roles. That's a little bit concerning for me in terms of Pain, especially with BRTT, because like he's another one of those legacy players that's played forever, but he's not the only one. Like the entire team thrived on being some of the like better skilled players, some of the better like team fighters, and the fact that their laning phase was just really rough is not great. But I'm happy to see that Pain Gaming, recognizing that in the game, have pivoted their viewpoint and or pivoted the way that they were playing the game so they could focus on neutral objectives. And it wasn't the cleanest, but it was good enough in terms of being able to like keep up within the game. Enough for me to be like really confused about like how PSG, how the Talons had like given up 2 Heralds and 2 Drakes for the whole thing and have barely contested. And to me, I'm looking back at it and I'm like, alright, cool. They are playing the neutral objectives well enough for Talons to recognize that they should probably not approach But like Pain Gaming, when they had gained the tempo lead because of these neutral objectives, were very sloppy in the approach. So I'm not super convinced. Not a whole lot. Um, and I'm really confused as to why they would contest so late on a lot of these things. Because like later into the game, over here, I broke down that they played late game neutral objectives incredibly well, even with an inefficient Baron that they had, um, and that they were able to close out the game really well, which is unfortunate because like it's sad to me that a lot of these games finish off with one big fight and it doesn't matter the setup. Granted, I do think that that will change the more the tournament plays, because the teams playing against each other will have to think more about the kind of games that they're going to be approaching and who they're going to be playing against. It's not going to be like, oh, maybe one who's close to being able to compete against me, or one team that's very close in competition with me, and then the other teams are just fodder. And I think that's something that I hope PSG changes their attitude around. Or not their attitude, but changes their approach around, because they're gonna have to be a lot more solid in their teamwork and coordination. Because they team fight very well when they have the ball rolling. Fantastic. It's just like that little start, that jump start at the beginning, um, that takes a lot to get going. And like from one of the next games that they're gonna play, the last game of the day, I'll probably explain a little bit more as to what I mean about like the coordination in general. But given that, for this particular game itself, I'm super impressed, Payne. Every game that you have been playing since I've started watching from your playoffs, and I say this again and again, is just consistent improvement. Very good adapting, compared, like, relatively speaking, to your region's level of play, and like solid stuff. You did keep up very well against this team, who, by all accounts, had a very solid grip on the situation. Even if they were giving up a lot of stuff, and they really shouldn't have. Uh, they had a solid grip on the situation for the most part, and you still played fairly well in this. Um, Paris Saint-Germain closes out the game fairly quick. Blah blah blah. I'm having a hard time speaking for some reason. They close it out quickly enough, go 3-1, tie up with the Lions, and likely will qualify with them, and Pain go 1-3, with an extra loss, and tie with the Wildcats. Next, so we're gonna put our friends at Pain away. There we go. We're gonna move. There we go on this side, and then bring over here our friends, the Wildcats, who play a fairly disappointing game. Couple of things that I have to mention from this game here is that I can appreciate, even if there's a lot of disappointment that comes from it, I can appreciate that at least the Wildcats were trying to be proactive in a lot of these games. They were attempting to be the team that made the first move, and were trying to put up the pressure and gain momentum and leads from being the first ones to make the move. They just weren't doing it good, right? They had a couple of moments. I gotta give shout out to Farfetch, who was pretty solid in this game, all things considered. Like, he was absolutely everywhere. And this is some support map movement that I'm like, where was this the other 4 games going, right? You spent 4 games not doing this? Even in your one win against Pain, this was not the kind of pressure you had put up. But, like, given that, Paris Saint-Germain still had the tempo lead on everything, and they played their neutral objective game better in this game specifically against the Wildcats, and that just kind of confused me more than anything else. Like, why were they so permissive to do so against Pain and not so much with Istanbul, or with what the Wildcats? And I'm looking at the composition in general, and I go, no, they played a very, very similar composition 2 games in a row. There should have been 0 reasons then from the previous game. And this over here tells me that despite the performance that Mad Lions has had during the entire tournament, I couldn't really put them lower because nobody else is doing much better than them, including Paris Saint-Germain, who's been continuously getting better, for the moment at least. And it, I kind of wish we had unified for them, just so that I could see like a better evaluation of what to expect. But we don't. So given what we have with Doggo, it's a lot of very messy approaches, sometimes very disjointed. But overall, because they have solid players across every role that is usually better on all accounts than the players on the Wildcats, they are getting away with a lot of different things. Although, again, the fundamentals, because it's still 4 out of the 5 of the entire team, the same kind of fundamentals that apply for them regularly are pretty good. They had solid wave manipulation and solid vision. They had played the neutrals better, like I said previously. And let me just double check my notes here. Yes. Yeah, and because of it, because of all of this kind of like setup that they had, because their core 4 are still playing as per usual, and they have those same kind of vision setups, it does make it easier for them to approach team fights very well, even if it's slightly disjointed or if there's like some weird communications that happen. It's just the bigger picture, like map movement stuff, tends to be a little slower in some regards, and I think that's still them getting used to it. But the team fights themselves, once they have vision, once they have everything set up, and that aspect of the game, I think they have pretty down pat. They are able to just proceed with being able to gain the necessary leads to be able to close properly. It's just it's really unfortunate because I like the way that Paris Saint-Germain plays with Doggo. It's just very disjointed, and again, I'm repeating myself, but it's worth noting that this is going to be an issue for them. Like, I don't think they're going to have a hard time facing off against Pentanet, but like against RNG, the disjointedness means that they're never going to be able to properly respond to the pressure. And if things go as expected with Day 6's games, they're going to face off against Damwon, and they're going to have the same kind of problem. And if things still kind of go as expected, again, things are a little bit wilder with Cloud9, who have to like ride an uphill battle with a 3-way tie currently. But if things were to go the expected status quo way, because Cloud9 is a much stronger early game team, they are probably going to have a hard time being able to face off against them as well. Now, do I expect them to be worse than Cloud9, or do I expect them to just be completely demolished by Damwon? No, but I'm hoping that they improve a little bit and they get a little bit more cohesive. They have quite a bit of time left. They have until, I believe it is, yeah, they have like 3 days they have about 3 days to like chill, recoup, and practice, and be able to like regain a bit of that like cohesiveness they can with Doggo, because that'll really change the way that they respond to plays, and it'll really help with just the overall approach that they have to the game outside of team fighting. And unfortunately, the Wildcats just, their decision making really baffles me sometimes. They make very weird map movements in a lot of places, and how they choose to pick fights really just kind of like flubs the whole thing. And from that, Paris Saint-Germain qualify with this game when they win 4-1, and Istanbul are in the fast-paced Wildcats, still IW. The fast-paced Wildcats get eliminated 1-4. Next. Oh, now we gotta actually put away all the hoop. Put you right over here, and put you right over here. We got the Lions on red side for this other game here versus Pain, who took blue side. And honestly, holy Toledo Joes, this game also like doubled down on my concerns for Mad Lion on a whole other note. And it is so unfortunate that this is how Pain gets eliminated because this was honestly one of the worst showings I've seen from the Lions. It's really rough. It's pretty bad. And like even the loss that they had against the Wildcats, I could chalk it up to just something weird, just there being inconsistent with the approaches to the game. But this is straight up like disrespectful in some cases, if some people would put it, but also just like poor preparation or like poor vision approach. They take a level 1, it goes horribly wrong, and it gives the entire advantage to Pain for the early start. And Pain, for the most part, rolls with it. And my biggest issue, unfortunately, is that, like, despite after this first level 1 fumble, that Mad Lions had some solid vision that they were approaching, that Pain equally had decent defensive and offensive vision in some aspects of the game. We're keeping up the proactive play, and we're properly going about the approach to their win condition. Like, this was starting to look like a very, very competent game out of Pain. And this wasn't one of those situations where, like, late game they punish Mad and, like, almost win. No, this is from level 1. Mad messes up, they punish appropriately, and they are the proactive ones. Which is something that, like, teams from this level usually don't do. They punish and then they just kind of sit and scale. And like, the unfortunate aspect of it is that their proactivity and the way that they were trying to keep up with their win conditions were still matched by Mad Lions, because they at least know how to answer whenever they're behind and whenever they've made a mistake. And unfortunately that means that Pain didn't properly balloon the lead enough for it to lead anywhere. And because of that, at some point Mad was able to find the proper mistakes for it and were able to win from it. That being said, the mistake they found still took a lot of time and showed a lot of hesitation out of the lines that unfortunately still makes me concerned that the second that they're going to be behind in any game, that they won't know how to respond on the international stage. And this is a kind of a phenomenon that I've witnessed a lot, doing this kind of thing. Not necessarily the videos on the YouTube channel, but personally for my fun time. This is what I kind of regularly do. I watch all the playoffs from every region, and I like spend my time trying to like figure out how all these teams work and how it makes them tick in some way, because that's just the kind of thing I like to do for fun. And a phenomenon that I realize a lot is that teams will realize how to play against the other teams of their own region because they're very familiar with it. So when they're behind, they know how to find the one idiosyncrasies that are like the fundamental weaknesses of the enemy team to be able to come back. But when they get into the international stage, they haven't gotten used to those teams on stage to be able to actually pull that off as frequently. And it leads to a lot of scenarios where there's like slight confusion, definitely some hesitation, like it was shown in this game, and a lot of posturing and waiting for opportunities that usually, instead of being proactive to try to find leads and try to like mitigate anything, they just wait for mistakes. And I already harped on lower regions during my Road to MSI series that waiting for mistakes to gain leads is tantamount to, in the same way that repeating drafts one game after another is tantamount to inability to adapt. And that's usually the biggest faux pas in international competition. You have to be prepared to adapt very quickly and from any game to game scenario. It's just unfortunate that Mad Lions has just more experience in terms of, or not necessarily more experience, but is much more effective at being able to balloon leads when they have them. So the mistake that they were able to punish to get Baron and shrunk the lead, and then they were able to balloon it for themselves and close quickly. And that gives me at least some solemn, like some ease of mind in terms of their approach when they come to going to the Rumble stage. But again, the early game thing is going to be really, or the being punished or being behind in a game against other international teams is really going to weigh on my mind when it comes to Mad Lions. But with that, they won this game and they also qualified with the Talons. And then we'll go to the next game here. And then with that, Pain also gets eliminated. And by that, Pain, guys, you guys did fantastic. By all means, right? You guys did incredibly well. Better than I think Pentanet, by all accounts. Personally, like, despite the fact that you guys will not have the same results at the end of the day, you did fantastic. And I know this because of how you approach this next game. Now, a lot of people, the Wildcats versus Pain game of the day is kind of a goof. Is a little bit of a goof, right? Like, you're not really thinking about it too much in terms of like high quality League of Legends. And by all expense, it's not. But sometimes it's good to indulge a little bit. But there is still some things to consider here, right? The Wildcats still try random things, and by all extents, if at some point you realize that things aren't working the way they are, you're going to go up against the team that you've got your only win, or that you don't have your only win, that you have your, that is your only main source of competition, like that is equal, and you're going to do all you can to fight. And guess what? That is exactly what happens. But there's like a big difference here. I've talked about in the Road to MSI series that I did regarding some of the... Oh, wow, there's a lot of videos. What is it? I think it's the RNG versus FPX series. Where in one of the games, it is non-stop fighting. And we've had a lot of those in this tournament. But the thing that I mentioned within that video is that you can tell when a game is done specifically to fight for the sake of fighting, just so that there's pressure, and lots of fighting that are responses to different events that are happening that both teams realize they need to advance the game. And this is the former, not the latter. This is a lot of chaotic stuff happening just because there's a lot of chaotic stuff happening. And the Wildcats were very sloppy. And Pain, however, took opportunities from this entire chaotic mess and were slowly grabbing pressure and slowly grabbing tempo every so often. Like, the tempo would trade back and forth whenever the game seemed to be put into that position. But that doesn't stop the fact that Pain had better wave manipulation when it came to this game. They had more neutral objectives that progressed the game to their win conditions. They were very smart about what was happening overall in this game, Well, it's like the Wildcats definitely seemed like they were just going haywire on it, and and for the most part, a lot of teams in the past, in terms of international competition, would usually go loose, right? They would just kind of play out the whole thing as like time to be the fun game. But it really showed that both of these teams were really trying to give their heart out and were really trying to do something with it. Part of it is also having to do with the the stakes of the tournament is that there is a region that's going to get an extra seed at Worlds. So any wins under your belt, solid. Uh, but unfortunately, the Wildcats really drafted something that I don't like. It's fun. By all accounts, it was a lot of fun. I appreciate that they had something extra flexible for their core three, the Renekton, Volibear, and Oriana. And for all of you, flexible just means that their bot lane can pick something that's dynamic and can carry because they'll have at least a front lane and something to enable the engages with it. And they picked Blitzcrank Callista. Very solo queue. And it can work professionally, but not with the kind of core three that they had in the top side. And by all accounts, Pain Gaming picked something that's not super simple, is a little bit more on the complicated end compared to the Wildcats. But this was like a solid showing out of BRTT, showing us that he can still play to this level. And like, is there really a doubt that he can play at this level? Not really, but he at least showed it because he had not brought up the results for it. And then everybody else, good job, guys. Like this was wild and chaotic. All right, I wouldn't recommend sticking to that when you go back to Brazil and show it off to everybody. And Wildcats, I would say the same thing. Don't bring this back to Turkey. Try to refine the things that actually made you very good in Turkey, and hopefully you guys come back and give it a second chance to an international tournament, because I was a big fan of you guys into your playoff series. You did fairly well, and I was very impressed with it, and then you kind of fumbled. And Pain, I was less impressed with you guys, but you have continuously shown growth and improvement over time that, hey, I hope you guys do very well in the summer, and that your playoff runs in the summer brings you to Worlds, because I want to see you do a round two from this. I want to see how far you guys can improve in quality. Yeah. Next, we're going to talk about the last game of the day. Now, this game also technically has no stakes, but it seems like both teams are still playing for, not bragging rights, but at least for pride, or something. And it still shows at least a little bit about what to expect when it comes to the next round. And where most of my thoughts of the day really lie on, because before watching this game, I had somebody, one of my friends, message me going like, is Mad Lions in the top 10 of the world out of all teams, right? Not just like top 10 of this tournament, like, because the World Championships holds more than one team from each region. Unless you're in a tier 3 or tier 4 regions, then it's just one team. But like, do they fit in the top 10? And I without a doubt said yes, until I started watching a lot of these games. I was already a little bit more cautious of them after the first 3 days that they played, but today really cast a doubt on that notion for myself. Now I'm happy to see that they were a lot more solid in this game. They had jungle tracking, very solid vision, and vision coverage across the map. They still were sloppy in terms of being able to clear out any vision, anything that would cause some, like, to create some vision denial. And Paris Saint-Germain were more than happy to punish on any given occasion. But overall, the the approach that MAD had and that the Talons had in both games or in this game specifically, was very back and forth, but at least it didn't feel to me as if the Lions were skipping steps, or at least not intentionally, but the Talons, it felt like they were. Or not, again, not intentionally, but they were skipping steps. Like they were skipping more steps than the Lions were in terms of what was needed to gain anything. Um, and it was a fairly close game overall, right? They both jockeyed for position for a lot of different things, and it came mostly down to a team fight. And I think this is the thing for this tournament that one confirmed with me the stuff I was talking about Talons, but at least relieved me of some of the doubts for the Lions, is that the Lions show more coordination than the Talons do. Definitely than Wildcats do. And, oh, I mixed these two up. Whoops. There we go. Yeah, that they definitely like showed more coordination than Wildcats, than Pain, and than Talon, and that some of the other teams too. And so that sense of coordination, the fact that their vision was fairly well done throughout this game, the fact that they had a decent enough neutral objective setups, and that only a few things within this game was sloppy and mostly during the early game portions, helped me at least have some relief that they are not going to have such a hard time against what is the expected number one and number two of like the tournament. Do I think they're going to win against them? No, but I do think that they'll have at least some competition more than what the other teams have tried to against them. I do think that they'll have a much easier chance, and because of my thoughts from that, this leads into the fact that the Mad Lions tend to have more coordination from the game that I watched here. Showed to me that the Talons had still to figure out their coordination and to like really hone in as to how they're going to approach with Doggo, because this really came down to like the way that the late game objectives were being played, like the late game neutral objectives. Mad Lions was first to almost everything, and if not, they were faster at contesting things and more consistent at doing so. And it's really unfortunate because the Talons seem to show that they can play very well against teams that are much weaker than them. And that's a lot of the teams, to be frank, but like the disjointedness of their coordination is going to be a problem for them going forward. And then with that, then the Lions here get to move on to the Rumble stage with a 5-1 score. And the Talons move on with a 4-2 score. Now, I usually have a section where I would go, well, here's my updated tier list. And I would have started the show also, because I forgot to do so, saying, here's the tier list that I have, right? Like you've got from the top left, and you go up, down, left. So up to down, left to right in terms of the order. And this is what I started with at the video, and this is where I'm ending it with the video. Nothing about the games this day really shook how I expected the power rankings here to be, and I think they're going to have a lot more movement tomorrow with the Group C's approach, or the Group C's games. I still think that the Wildcats were better at adapting and much more consistent than the Unicorns were, but not as much as Pentanet. Pentanet definitely showed a little bit better, but Pain was the most consistent like improvement throughout and much better at adapting across the board compared to everything. And I think that if they had to play against Infinity, they would probably win. Infinity so far has yet to convince me. Like, I'm happy that they're not playing as poorly as they did in the playoffs. But that being said, Detonation Focus Me has been a great surprise, and they don't show anything that would convince me that anybody from those bottom sevens would beat Cloud9 consistently. I know that Detonation Focus Me has, but I don't think anything that would convince me that Cloud9 has to go further down, and as such, that doesn't change the ranking too much here. So, with that, I put a nice little green circle for those who qualified and a red X on the one team that was eliminated, and so we're going to do the same. So, we bid you adieu. We bid you adieu. Bonjour, au revoir to Pain and Wildcats, and congrats to our friends, the Talons, and the Lions for having qualified. You guys let me know in the comments down below what you think so far. Do you agree with me? Are you kind of happy with some of the results that the teams have had so far, despite if they qualified or haven't? Do you think that they could have done better? Are you disappointed? Let me know. I might have been a little bit rambly. I've had a very long day, and I apologize for that, but I hope that all of my thoughts came through at least cohesively or concisely for this video. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. As per usual, over here I'll be putting in the Road to MSI playoff series, or playlist series, where I had watched all of these regions playoff series. Here that helps me make my informed evaluation and analysis. And over here, the playlist to so far the Clearing Vision MSI playlist series for every video that I've made of these so far. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, likely tomorrow. Ciao.